Did you know that on the 10th of March 1953, North Korean shore guns opened near Wonsan, and the battleship USS Missouri answered with a storm of 998 rounds from her 5-inch divided by 38 seconds in a single day? The first flash came at grey dawn, a bright stab from the cliffs at Hodo Pando. Missouri's air spotters called bearings. The Mark 37 directors locked in, and the mounts roared. Shell cases clanged across hot steel. The ship shook like a living thing. Sailors worked by muscle memory. Spot, compute, fire. Spot, compute, fire. A loader in Mount 51 felt the deck shiver under his boots and kept feeding powder bags because the battery would not slow until the hillside went quiet. Over her Korean deployment, Missouri also hurled 2,895 16-inch divided by 50 Mark 7 shells and 8,043 5-inch rounds, numbers that turn legend into ledger. Each 16-inch shell weighed as much as a small car and hit with the force of a thunderclap. Each 5-inch round stitched the rocks and radar posts that gave the enemy aim. The human piece is simple. Chiefs with battered stopwatches, phone talkers repeating calm corrections, gun captains who would not leave their stations while the plot stayed hot. American excellence showed as a system, not a slogan, radar, air spotting, disciplined crews, and a logistics tale that kept magazines full at sea. The enemy felt the shock fast. Rock they trusted as armor became a target reference for American gunnery. The cliffs that hid their guns became backdrops for precise punishment. When the last burst fell, the only thing left was smoke, shattered stone, and silence. This is how a democracy fights at sea, with skill, speed, and stamina. Missouri did not just survive an ambush. She reversed it in minutes and set the rhythm for the coast. The bridge to what comes next is even harder to believe, because one battleship's thunder was only one limb of a larger American body. Another Iowa-class ship would soon arrive and hunt the guns themselves, not only answering fire, but ending it by collapsing the mountain mouths that fed it. The question is stark and honest. How do you kill artillery that hides inside a cave? The answer is the kind of revelation that makes you say, "Holy cow, we actually did that." Did you know the battleship USS New Jersey did more than stand the line at Wonsan? She hunted the guns that hid in rock and sealed the caves shut with 16-inch hits. In late May 1953, the air spotters marked arcs over Hodo, Pando, and Kojo. The main battery walked shells up the slopes until the earth itself failed. The 5-inch divided by 38 seconds added a harsh drumbeat of counter-battery, quick and mean, tearing at radar posts and observation towers that gave the shore batteries eyes. Spray leaped from the harbour while the ship chased the flash, bracketing a cave mouth, shifting 100 yards, then lifting fuses to punch deeper. Turret captains scratched grease pencil notes on armour plate. Plotting rooms ticked like careful clocks. Powder men pushed silk bags that weighed more than they did. A boatswain said cave targets felt like a duel with the earth. You kept hitting until the hillside slumped and the muzzle went dark. "Here is the problem," asked Clear so everyone gets it. "How do you kill an artillery piece tucked inside a mountain?" Here is the revelation that proves American superiority. You collapse the mountain because your gunnery teams, fire control radars, and logistics tail let you put the exact shell on the exact grid at the exact second, again and again, without running dry. The human element is a young spotter squinting through haze calling, "Up 200 fire," then holding his breath until splash becomes dust, and dust becomes a crater. The enemy's shock was more than fear. It was recognition. Stone was not a shield against Americans who fused sensors and steel into one motion. When the smoke drifted, you could feel the shift in the bay. The shore guns fired less. They moved less. flash drew a reply measured in tons. This chapter binds forward with a quiet truth that lifts the hair on your arms. None of this accuracy happens by magic. It happens because lonely cutters far out on a storm line kept time for the whole theatre, so a muzzle flash on a cliff became math on a chart, then a crater on target, and a coastline that stopped shooting back. Did you know victories at Wonsan depended on ships you almost never see in newsreels? Coast Guard cutters standing ocean stations for weeks to feed weather and position to the fleet and to the air. Here is the problem to solve, plain as a chalk line. How do you deliver precise naval gunfire and on-time flights across a violent ocean where storms move like armies and compasses lie? Here is the revelation that proves the American way of war at sea. In 1950, a single station, such as Station Nan, averaged 357 radar fixes per patrol, more than 700 hours on station, and about 4,000 miles steamed, launching radio-sonde balloons day and night so pilots and gunners got wind and pressure data that turned equations into hits. It looked like drudgery, but it was power. 21 days in 2050 foot seas. Decks awash, coffee sloshing in metal mugs, radios chattering at all hours. A quartermaster drew a clean line of position as sleet stung his cheeks and passed a destroyer the numbers it needed. Far away, a cliff paid the bill in falling stone. A radar man tapped a green cathode with one knuckle to steady his scope and felt proud when a pilot read back his fix. That is American pride without noise, steady hands and accurate math that make big guns honest. The enemy never saw these small ships. They only met the accuracy that arrived like a clock, no matter the weather. The cutters did not carry 16-inch guns, but they carried the time and truth those guns required. This is what national scale looks like. Each small duty connects to a larger blow. The bridge into the next chapter turns that precision into courage, under impossible conditions. Because sometimes the signal you send across a restless sea is not a firing solution at all. Sometimes it is a call for help. And then Americans put machines and hearts on the line to pull strangers from black water within sight of hostile shores, even when rockets and waves say, "Don't try it." Did you know a Coast Guard PBM-5G Mariner, set down in 15-foot seas near communist shores to rescue a downed Navy P-2V Neptune crew, loaded 11 men aboard, and then tried to claw back into the sky with JATO bottles roaring in the dark? Lieutenant John Big John Vukic said, "There was a 15-foot sea and a 25-mile wind, and you can see the spray hammer the bow as sailors haul soaked flyers through a side hatch." The Mariner's twin Wright R2000 800 seconds coughed and screamed. The hull pounded forward. Rockets lit. The big flying boat slammed back into the swells, groaned like a wooden pier in a storm, and the crew fought to get everyone into rafts. Some rescuers died and were later honored for heroism. The living said the cold cut straight through bone. One survivor said, "We were so cold we didn't care who got us, just so they had a fire to keep us warm." That sentence is America in one breath, power aimed outward, compassion aimed inward, both at full throttle. Equipment details matter because they carry weight. Flare pistols hissed. Mae West vests creaked as men leaned back into the dark to hook another arm. The sea smelled of fuel and iron. The reason this belongs in a story about crushing shore guns is simple. The same nation that pounds a cave flat will also throw a flying boat into winter seas to save strangers, even under enemy eyes. The enemy's shock was real. Americans would risk a priceless aircraft and their own lives not to kill but to save. That kind of culture breaks the will of an opponent who expects only cruelty. The bridge to what comes next is industrial and relentless. While crews fought the sea for men, the homeland kept the freight moving and the ports clean, so the line at Wonsan never snapped for want of a fuse, a shell, or a gallon of fuel. Did you know victory at sea also grew from men with clipboards and Geiger counters who guarded the ports that fed the Pacific Line? In New York alone, Coast Guard and Navy security teams conducted thousands of checks and in one campaign screened over 1,500 ships to keep sabotage and radiological threats off the docks. On the Columbia River, detachments supervised the loading of 500-ton ammunition barges, a rolling fuse line that fed battle wagons and carriers month after month. The smell was creosote and diesel and rope. The sound was boots on gangways, cranes squealing, and a petty officer's pencil tapping hull numbers into a log. This is where American scale becomes a weapon. Not one ship, but a continent of factories, railheads, and river barges, pushing steel and powder forward without missing a beat. A port security sailor said the best day was nothing found, everything sailing, because that meant Missouri and New Jersey stayed on station with fat magazines. The statistic that tops it is tempo. Hit today, hit tomorrow, hit next week. The enemy learned the awful truth that the pipeline behind the gun line could not be strangled. That truth shows our character too. Workers checked cargo at midnight. Wives ran victory kitchens near piers. Trains rolled on time. Barges nosed out with fuses strapped down and flags stiff in the wind. Harbour guards scanned for a glint that did not belong and waved another ship through. Battleships crashing caves, ocean stations feeding the numbers, rescue pilots betting their lives, and a homeland conveyor that never stalled until one last American round spoke and a hostile harbour went silent for good. Did you know the blockade of Wonsan lasted 861 days, the longest continuous naval blockade in modern history, and ended at 0959 on the 28th of July, 1953. When the last American round echoed off at the bay, here is the problem that tests nations, not just ships. Can you keep capital vessels, destroyers, minesweepers, and aircraft on a hostile coast for more than 2 years, under fire, through winter gales, without letting the noose slip? Here is the revelation that proves why no other nation could match it. America fused an Iowa-class gun line with carrier air, radar pickets, ocean station cutters, and a secure homeland supply chain so a muzzle flash became coordinates, then a cave collapse, then a port too afraid to move. The scene writes itself. New Jersey's main battery throws 16-inch steel, Missouri's 5-inch divided by 38 seconds rake counter fire. Minesweepers nose ahead like street sweepers with nerves of iron. Pilots call grids as calmly as baseball scores. A former shore gunner later admitted the realization that cracked morale. The ships kept coming like the tide. Except the tide does not fire back with radar-spotted salvos. The human element carries the flag high. The cutter watchstander who logged his 700th hour on station that patrol. The rescue pilot who gambled the black water for strangers. The longshoreman who signed off another powder car at midnight, so the magazines stayed ready. The final images stack up like proof in a ledger. Caves sealed, towers toppled, harbours locked, a coastline that learned silence was safety. And then, at 0959, a last American round, steam lines hissing, gulls turning over the grey, and a quiet that says endurance wins wars. The closing punch is the impossible number that became true because American values turned into endurance, precision, and mercy when it was needed most. 861 days, 0 quit, and a free world that could breathe, because a fleet would not go home until the job was done. Did you know the whole gun line at Wonsan depended on little ships that hunted mines under fire? Like neighborhood street sweepers clearing a road during a riot. In October 1950, US, minesweepers pushed into fields sown with Soviet-made mines, and home-built copies, the kind that could tear open a hull in a heartbeat. Crews in flak jackets worked winches, kites, and cutters that sliced mooring cables like piano wire. Every snap could be a death sentence, every floating horned sphere a trap. When a ship took a hit, others kept sweeping because a blocked channel meant the big guns could not get in close, the destroyers could not patrol, and the supply ships could not top off the fleet. The smell was hot oil and salt, the sound a rattle of chain, rifle shots at drifting mines, and the flat crack of shore batteries trying to blind the brooms. A boatswain's call cut the wind as men leaned back on lines and muscles, paying out, hauling in, and calling bearings in voices that never cracked. Helm orders came short and sharp, right 2 degrees, steady, hold so the sweep gear could bite. These sailors learned to read the water like a book. A slick where none should be, a feather of foam that hinted at a mooring cable, a dark shape that did not belong. They learned to shoot a mine low so it would roll and burst away from the hull. They learned to heave a wounded man aboard without looking at the blood, and they learned to keep going when the last thing in your body wants to keep the throttle up. That is American grit in a narrow channel. Small ships doing a giant's job so giants can reach their range. Shore gunners watched the sweepers advance and felt a sick truth: if the brooms cannot be stopped, the battleships will come. When they come, the caves will not save you, the towers will not see for you, and the harbour you thought you controlled becomes someone else's map. The bridge forward is simple and terrifying for the enemy. Once the road is open, America brings the whole orchestra, guns, planes, radios, and fuel to play one song, all day, every day, until resistance sounds foolish even to brave men. Did you know American pilots in rugged workhorses, F-4U Corsairs, and AD Sky Raiders often circled Wonsan as calm as surveyors, calling corrections that turned battleship salvos into scalpels? A spotter would mark a flash bearing, range, fall of shot, and the message would run down a chain that started in the clouds and ended in steel. The battleship's plotting rooms took those numbers and fed the main battery computers. The gunnery radars held the line. The turrets slewed with a grace that looked impossible for a machine so big. From the deck you saw smoke rings leap from the muzzles and drift, lazy and sinister, over grey water. From the cockpit you watched a cliff face bloom into dust, then settle into a new shape that could no longer hide a gun. The destroyers added their tempo, 5-inch divided by 38 mounts snapping at counterfire, while little HO-3S helicopters skimmed the coast to fetch downed flyers or pass a close-up look at a stubborn target. It was a system, not a stunt carriers on the horizon feeding sorties, picket ships sorting the air picture, radio circuits humming like a nervous system that never slept. The power of it lives in the calm voices. Up 200, left 100, on, fire. The power of it lives in the patience. Wait for splash, adjust, fire again, even as enemy shells walk closer to your wake. American excellence meant no part acted alone. A pilot's grease pencil marks on a plexiglass panel mattered to a sailor in a steel turret he couldn't see. A destroyer's radar mattered to a marine shore party counting seconds between salvos. The enemy learned to fear the quiet between shots more than the shots themselves, because silence meant the next correction would be better. They saw that even when clouds closed the sky, the chain still worked, radar could see, directors could track, and the guns would not lose the thread. The bridge to what comes next is the backbone that made this tempo possible. At sea refueling and rearming that turned the Sea of Japan into America's mobile base, a gas station and magazine that moved with the fight. Did you know America brought the gas station, ammo dump, and grocery down to the gun line and kept it there as long as needed? Oilers, like the old fleet AOs, slid alongside battleships and carriers in close seas, passing hoses and tensioned lines until black fuel sloshed into thirsty tanks. Ammunition ships AEs with steel decks scuffed by forklifts hoisted crates of powder and shells into magazines that turned numbers on a manifest into noise on a coast. Crews called it CONREP, Connected Replenishment, and once you watched it in a quartering sea, you never forgot it. Ships keeping perfect station, lines singing like harps, pallets swinging, and sailors guiding the load with gloved hands steady as surgeons. Nothing about it was romantic. Everything about it was decisive. You cannot fire 16-inch shells without black powder, and you cannot chase radar plots without diesel and avgas. So, America made sure every need was met at sea, which meant the schedule belonged to the fleet, not to any port. The smell was bunker fuel and paint. The taste was salt on your lips and coffee burning your tongue at 0300 while you waited for your station call. Men joked to cut the fear, because mistakes in the wire forest could break bones or necks, but the work finished, the logs showed full, and the ships turned back to the coast without ever risking an empty magazine or a dry tank. That is what a continental economy does when it decides to win. It shows up everywhere, even in places that cannot be seen from shore. Enemy observers learned the rhythm and despaired no pause, no hunger, no shortage, only a line of grey hulls that took what they needed from their own and returned to punish attempts to move a truck, build a pier, or expose a gun. When you add up what the battleships and their escorts actually did in steel and time, the numbers don't sound real, but they are. And they explain why the coast finally learned to keep its head down. Did you know Missouri's Korean deployment saw 2,895 16-inch shells and 8,043 5-inch rounds fired? And on the 10th of March 1953, she alone threw 998 5-inch shells in one day. Did you know New Jersey's late spring missions cracked caves and burned out observation posts until whole cliff lines changed shape under repeated 16-inch hits? Stack the figures and the picture sharpens. Hundreds of heavy shells in a single operation, thousands of secondary rounds across months, and a pace that stayed high because the fleet always had fuel and fuses. Add the unseen math. Ocean stations, giving hundreds of radar fixes per patrol, watchstanders logging more than 700 hours on station, and cutters steaming 4,000 miles in the worst seas to keep the numbers honest. The outcome is simple: accuracy plus mass, delivered every day. A loader might remember powder smoke and a ringing in his bones. A pilot might remember grease pencil grids and the strange beauty of a star shell opening like a white flower over a dark bay. A destroyer skipper might remember counting seconds, calling a turn, and feeling the ship come alive under his hands as a near miss marched by. They all would remember the cliff that stopped firing. They would remember the wireless traffic that suddenly went quiet. They would remember the day a harbour full of ambush learned the cost of lighting a fuse against a fleet that had no quit in it. The enemy's lesson was not that they were cowards or clumsy. They were brave. They were disciplined. They were simply outmatched by a nation that could deliver steel with precision, feed the delivery with logistics, and do it longer than anyone else. The bridge into the next chapter asks the biggest question of all and answers it with lived experience. Why could only America sustain such pressure? And what did that force do to the will of men who faced it for years? Did you know this campaign worked because America welded values to hardware, then sent both to sea? The values were teamwork, precision, and mercy when it mattered. The hardware was the Iowa class, carriers and destroyers, helicopters and spotter planes, oilers and ammunition ships, cutters and radios. No part could be missing, because the chain was only as strong as the smallest link, a cracked gasket in a fueling hose, or a lazy calculation at a weather station could throw off the whole shot. But the chain held, day after day, because a democracy asked ordinary people to do exacting jobs and then trusted them to do it. A radarman on a cutter did not wear ribbons for gunnery, but his steady hand made gunnery true. A longshoreman rolling powder cars at midnight never saw the coast he helped silence, but his pencil check cleared the shell that did the work. A helicopter crewman who clipped a hoist to a shivering pilot also clipped a message to the enemy. We save our own, under fire, and we will be back tomorrow with full tanks and ready guns. The enemy saw the pattern and felt the weight of it. You could fight a duel. You could not fight a machine that was also a community. You could not measure yourself against a nation that made the sea its workshop and the coastline its timetable. That is why only America could keep a blockade alive for 861 days. Why only America could crush cave guns and still throw a flying boat into black water for strangers, and why only America could stand the long watch without losing its edge or its soul. The bridge to the final chapter is a sound and a time, fixed forever. A last report over grey water at 0959 on a summer morning, the echo bouncing off empty cliffs, and a harbour that finally understood the meaning of quiet. Did you know the last American round at Wonsan was fired at 0959 on the 28th of July 1953, closing a blockade that had lasted 861 days and teaching a coastline the cost of lighting shots at a US battleship? Picture the deck in that minute. Hatches dogged, signal flags snapping, a breeze off the bay, and sailors at their stations calm as men, finishing a job they had promised to finish. The report rolls out, a low, solid thud that you feel in your ribs more than you hear with your ears, and the shell arcs toward cliffs that learned the hard way what precision backed by an entire nation can do. No loud victory speech, no cheers over the circuit, just checklists and quiet pride. Guns secured, turrets locked, magazines safe, logbooks signed. That is how America ends a thing professionally, completely, with mercy where it can and force where it must. Count the elements that made the moment true. Minesweepers cleared the road under fire, destroyers and cruisers fenced with counter-battery and never flinched. Battleships crushed caves and folded observation towers. Pilots traced grids and called corrections. Helicopters and flying boats risked black water to save lives. Oilers and ammunition ships turned the ocean into a moving base, while cutters on station found the numbers that made every shot honest. Add it all, and the ledger reads like a dare. Accuracy plus mass, sustained across winters and typhoons, backed by a homeland that never let the belts run dry. The enemy's last feeling was not shame. It was respect mixed with relief, because the cliff you hide behind is a poor friend when a free people decide to reach it. The final punch tops everything that came before, because it is both a statistic and a character test passed in public. 861 days. Zero quit, a free fleet, keeping faith with itself and its allies, until the job was done, and then going home the same way it came, steady, disciplined, and ready to do it again, if freedom ever calls.